All right, it's 5:32. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the zoning subcommittee meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Milanazzo.
Here.
Counsel Belanja.
Here.
Counsel Rourke.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the proposed zoning amendments from the Development Services Office. We're joined this evening by Councilor Jim Leary as well as Councilor Rita Mercier. Thank you for being here. And from the administration, we have City Manager Murphy. Thank you. Christine O'Connor, our City Solicitor, and Eric Slagle, the Director of Developmental Services. So what I'd like to do is suggest to the group, and I certainly appreciate the neighborhood being represented here tonight. You will have an opportunity to comment tonight on the proposed amendments, but I don't believe that this is something we're going to get through in one meeting. So I anticipate that there'll be additional subcommittee meetings as we go through this package. But I just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard as we go through the information. And you all know, Deb, you all know that when you come up to the podium, please sign your name so that we have a record when you come to speak before the subcommittee. So unless the members have any comments at this time, what I'd like to do is recognize the city manager to kick the meeting off, and then I believe we're going to have a presentation from the Development Services Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been an endeavor that Development Services and the Law Department and myself have been involved in with the last several months. This results from a number of council motions that were made relative to zoning, plus comments that the Division of Planning and Development and other departments have received relative to zoning in the city and how that would affect the new type of businesses that are starting to emerge in the city of Lowell. So I know it's a lengthy document. I've gone through it item by item myself, so we're prepared to assist this subcommittee and the committee of the whole with any answers. But I think it would be good for Mr. Slagle just to give a brief summary of this proposal, and then we can just move on to what you said. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Chair recognizes Eric Slagle.
Thank you, councilors. Thank you, Mr. Manager. As the manager mentioned, this is a document that's been kind of long in the works. We typically in Development Services over time collect kind of little problems that don't need to be fixed immediately, but if we have a larger document, we include a lot of smaller changes in the larger document, as well as response to council motions. This document addresses a few specific council motions. I just wanted to mention the first was a motion from Councilor Rourke talking about in-law apartments, and we attempted to take a thoughtful approach to allowing limited scope of in-law apartments in the city, and we'll go over that in a little bit more detail. There also was a motion regarding Airbnbs and their impact on the residential neighborhoods in the city. So there is a section in here that talks a little bit about that type of use and what we can do to get a better handle on where it's happening in the city. We also attempted to address something that has come up before the council multiple times. I think Councilor Mercier has commented on it several times with respect to the storage of unregistered vehicles on property. And again, we tried to take a thoughtful balance between those, the competing interests, and come up with something that we think can work going forward. In addition, as the manager mentioned, a lot of these changes are to deal with both the vibrancy, walkability, and economic development of our urban commercial districts. So we've included several new business types, use types, in an effort to create spaces for the type of business we think we want to see in the downtown and the urban mixed use and commercial districts, while still keeping in the appropriate scale for the kind of the vibrancy of those districts. And in addition to that, a lot of what you see in here is simply cleanup for issues that we've come up with that didn't really have an answer, and we tried to make small minor changes to the zoning ordinance to make those answers. And there is, in fact, also a section dealing with an issue that's come up before the planning board regularly, having to do with the transfer of large-scale residential properties to non-tax-paying entities. So there's an attempt to address that in here as well. We've broken it up into kind of bite-sized sections. The first section is lists of uses that are going to be added, that we propose to be added to the zoning ordinance. The second smaller section is lists of uses to be added as accessory uses to the zoning ordinance. Then there's a list of things that are definitions that we're adding that didn't exist in the zoning ordinance otherwise. Then there's a list of sections that we're merely revising. For instance, the landscaped open space that we're revising was done in concert with the city engineer to attempt to address kind of paving in front yards and give us a little bit more kind of well-defined definition of that, a little bit more teeth to provide green space in front yards. And we can talk about that specifically. And then there are things to improve permitting efficiency. One of the main things is to streamline the process before the boards by taking items that would normally require you to go to the zoning board for a special permit and also to the planning board for some sort of relief, and saying, if you have to go to the planning board, we're gonna make that special permit with the zoning board a planning board special permit. So you kind of go to just to one board. It will save the applicant time. Likely there will be a lesser cost because you don't have to notice. You don't have to pay the Lowell Sun for multiple advertisements. You don't have to send out multiple notices to abutters. So there'll be some cost savings for them, but also improved efficiency, and we'll still have a review of those special permits by the board. So there's a lot of different things. I think probably what makes sense is for us to talk through it linearly, start from
Okay.
the beginning, where we're talking about the additional uses, if that's okay.
So we'll start with the to be added as uses, is that where we want to start? Okay, okay. Now, I just want to make sure that the neighborhood group has a copy of what we have in front of us. Okay, good. Does that approach make sense? We'll start, there's 5 sections, we'll start with the first section this evening.
I think that's a
To
good
be
approach,
added.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
So the first section under the to be added as uses is what we call an accessory dwelling unit. As I'm sure the counselors know, with the kind of the aging senior population, that we in Development Services have seen an increase in people coming in to request some sort of permitting or changes to enable an older relative, a parent, or some other older relative to come back and live in the family home. And kind of on the flip side, we have seen an increase in multi-generational families because of the housing costs in Massachusetts. You know, multiple nuclear units are living in a single family. And so we've had lots of requests ever since I've been at Development Services for how to deal with in-law apartments. The largest problem with that, and the reason why, quite frankly, we haven't really taken a shot at this before, is because of enforceability, and because there's a serious concern on our part that those in-law apartments somehow become 2 families and get rented out to renters. And that's absolutely something that we do not want to see in the neighborhoods. That's not, if you've bought into a single-family neighborhood, you don't want your next-door neighbor throwing on another apartment and having, renters live in that apartment. So what we constructed is kind of a thoughtful balance, we think, between those competing interests. So it allows for an accessory dwelling unit only on certain conditions. The first and kind of most important condition is this is just for 3 years. You get a 3-year certificate of occupancy, and in 3 years you have to come back in and get another one. The second is it has to be inhabited by immediate family members. and they can't, you may not charge them rent. So mother or father, son or daughter, or their respective spouses, grandmother or grandfather. So we're trying to narrow the pool of individuals who'd be eligible for these sorts of units. And then, as you can see, there's a list of provisions. It has to be within a single-family structure and has to maintain the appearance of a single-family structure. You can't have a boarder or lodger within either unit. You have to get a building permit to construct it, obviously. You have to get a certificate of occupancy. It's only good for 3 years. And it shall occupy no more than 1/3 of the gross floor area of the property. And you have to provide increased parking. And you can't be incorporated into a detached structure. The idea is, by this, is to minimize kind of the visual impact on the neighborhood, to make sure that you're providing appropriate parking for the individual or individuals who will be living in that unit. But quite frankly, to make sure that it looks like a single family, so that if in 3 years you no longer have an in-law there, you can be ordered to return it to a single family status. And that's what would happen if your certificate of occupancy expires.
Thank you. Any questions, Council Belanger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Slagle, I think you're taking a sensitive approach here, and you're answering to the concerns and needs of the residents of the city of Lowell. Overall, I don't have an issue for a single-family home owner, designating a little space for what we call immediate family. But as we both know, that could, down the road, end up being a rental unit for income and become another source of income for the homeowner. And that's not fair to the abutters, and that's what we just don't want to happen. Although your intuition is trying to do the right thing, and I understand that. Now, what's a concern of mine is, in a normal apartment rental unit is a 3-year inspection, right? Every 3 years, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, well, in my opinion, I think in-laws need to be scrutinized a little more than that. I think it should be a yearly inspection, so that it doesn't convert. The inspector will know, he may see visible changes. So I think it just needs to be scrutinized a little more than an average rental unit, I really do. So that just doesn't happen, what we alluded to earlier. So I think we need more frequent inspections rather than once every 3 years, in my opinion. So these, quote, in-laws, they will have full kitchens, will have a full kitchen in them?
Well, again, this would allow a completely separate unit in the house. So
Okay.
Everything that would make, kitchen, bath,
Right.
that would be allowed in this accessory dwelling.
Does it have to have 2 egresses, such as a normal single?
Absolutely, that's a building code thing.
yeah,
It's not
right.
covered by
Okay.
zoning. You'd absolutely have to have the required number for fire safety. You'd
Right.
have to meet the fire code. You'd have to meet the building code. Nothing in this would exempt them from those
Okay,
requirements.
excellent. How about ZBA? Will it need a variance, will it need ZBA approval?
Well, as you see down at the bottom of the first page, there's a proposed modification to the accessory use table that lists out where it would be allowed. So in the suburban single family, it would be allowed as a matter of right if you got the certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
And demonstrated that it was an immediate family member. In the multifamily districts, you were required to go to the planning board to get a special permit. And in the traditional two-family, traditional single-family, and the urban single-family, you could do it as a matter of right, again, as long as you demonstrated you were eligible for the certificate of occupancy by showing that the person who's living there is going to be
Okay, now
immediate
without
family.
intruding too much on the homeowner, how do we confirm, I guess, if you will, that this is a family member living here? How do we go about that?
Well, again, that's the fly in the ointment for everything. I think you'd have to have proof of that the person living there is a relative, some sort of signed statement under the pains and penalties of perjury, along with identification for the people, and description of their relationship. Again, that's always going to be the challenging piece of this, is proving that relationship.
Okay, no, it's in its infancy, we're just deliberating now, but, overall, I think a single-family homeowner, City Hall has somewhat of a right to, form another unit, if you will, for immediate family member, but I do think it needs to be really scrutinized to more than a degree than an average rental unit, which is once every 3 years, Eric. I think it needs to be looked at more frequently to make sure homeowners are adhering to this, because it's not fair to their abutters if everybody wants to make a small business out of this. And I think most homeowners are going to try and do the right thing. But those are my concerns, so I'm curious to hear those of my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Belanger. Councilor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Mr. Slagle, I think the provisions that you added to this, the accessory dwelling unit, I think are actually pretty good and just for someone that's really looking to do the right thing. The reason why the motion was filed, I think, is, people that want to take care of a loved one, an aging parent, grandparent, the rise of healthcare costs and the cost of nursing homes and so forth. And then there are just some people that don't want to have to, leave their family to go to a nursing home, right? So I think you actually put in even provision A. It plainly states that owner occupies single-family structure built in a manner which maintains the appearance of a single-family home. I think right there that you set a good lead for the balance of what else needs to be followed. I understand it's a delicate subject, but I think the report that you gave us here pretty much covers any obstacles for people that just want to make it, a two-family. I also think that the provision that you added saying that it has to be within a single-family home, it can't be a two-family or so forth. I think that also helps keep, the negative reasons for doing it away as well. The egress and the way of filing for certificates and permits, I think, also covers for it. And so I think it's a good thing. I'd be curious to hear, going forward how it works out. But I think that you've addressed the issues that in the past you may not have wanted to put something in this. But I think the date and time that we're in now, I think, calls for something like this to be implemented. I know other cities and towns around Lowell have a similar plan to this, and it does seem to work rather well. So, but it's a good report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Rourke. Mr. Slagle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there are several cities, towns around in the area that have accessory dwelling unit type ordinances to allow this. Again, this is just a draft. I fully understand if it's the will of the council, the will of the public, that there be more frequent inspections. I think that's perfectly appropriate. Again, while this is just a proposal, if there was, a suggestion that it not be allowed of right in any district, but required to go to the planning board every single time you want to do it, to make sure that the people that we're getting are the people who actually are doing this for the right reasons, because put the hurdles in front of them and make sure they're doing it for the right reasons, I think that would be perfectly appropriate. It's just a matter
Councilor O'Rourke.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because people that want to do the right thing wouldn't mind, because they wouldn't want their neighbor having a 2 or 3 family into a single family. So I don't think that's a problem at all.
Great, thank you. Since we began our meeting, we had Councilor Leahy, Councilor Samaras, and Councilor Elliott join us, so thank you. If there are no other comments from my colleagues, I'm going to actually open it. Oh, Councilor Elliott, then I'm going to open up to the public to speak on this point. Councilor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this because I do think it's important that we keep a lid on this. It does happen. It is happening. I guess my question is, enforcing it is one thing, but when a piece of property changes ownership, and if the prior owner created an apartment without pulling a permit, how, and I know of a couple of circumstances personally that has happened relatively close to me, how does the city identify it? Meaning, a neighbor puts in an in-law apartment, does not pull a permit, does not go through the process, or doesn't go through the process, and then doesn't pull a permit, yet then it's advertised as, as such. Is there a way? Is there a requirement when you pass papers that the city inspect it? Or, I know there's the assessment process, but.
Mr. Manager.
Having gone through this before, I think I could. First of all, the assessors are just going to assess it as it is.
Right.
If it's a 3-family and a single family, they're going to assess it as a 3-family.
And they're not going to know whether it's a legitimately
But
permitted.
right now, and we're just going through this with another piece of property in Lowell, is most banks will require you to give a zoning opinion that it's a legal use, and so you'd go to the building department, and you could request the zoning administrator to give you an opinion on what the legal use of that is. And if you don't agree with that, then you can appeal it to the Board of Appeals, and they can make the determination onto the use. So we do have a process for determining the legality of a building.
So to follow up on that, Mr. Manager, Mr. Chair, the onus falls on the new property owner?
Yeah,
It would fall on the buyer of the property
Buyer.
Right.
to come in, to
So
make sure
the
that
answer
it's
is yes, the new
in
property
in
owner.
zoning.
So I guess here's an instance that if the buyer is looking for additional space, maybe he or she may or may not look to be in compliance.
Mr. Slagle?
Oh, no, well, I
Won't
would,
get the loan from the bank, though.
Right.
right, I was about to say, the
see.
lenders
Won't
are
be
the
able
one
to
who
buy
are
that.
acquiring.
So,
Correct.
yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Anybody else? The chair recognizes Deb Forgione. Would you like to? Again, this is on the accessory dwelling unit, the first item, Deb.
Yep, we've been reading them. In fact, that's the very first item. That was probably one of the ones that we wanted to be able to have all the neighborhoods speak about, because we've been before boards many times about these. And we can tell you from our point of view what is the repercussions or unintended consequences. So with what you're proposing in a city of 105,000 people, who it's also a college town, that looking for housing for students on an ongoing basis, right now in that climate, to put this forward. I did talk to somebody that works in inspectional services and said, almost impossible for you to regulate it with a city this big. So what you're doing is opening a can of worms, because you're saying that there are some situations where somebody has to put in a full working kitchen for a parent that needs to be taken care of. So what you're saying is they're going to put in mini apartments in a house. So if you think about the city and all the neighborhoods and the size of houses in and around the city, which houses could actually absorb that if they're a suburban single-family house? So if you live on a street and they're all good-sized houses like in the Highlands, every single house will be able to do that. And you won't really stop it, and you just got to monitor it. And so for me, you're opening a can of worms, because unintended consequences, a city of 105,000 people that's become a college town that's not getting enough housing for their students, there's going to be the challenge right there. And they're already having enough trouble monitoring housing that's housing students and single-family suburban neighborhoods, and monitoring that. And now you're going to open the door to, now you're going to monitor this. In Drake, what they do is, if you have a in-law, one entrance, everybody uses the same entrance, there's no back entrance, and it's not a separate unit, because that constitutes an apartment. So in Drake, a true in-law, everybody goes in the front door, and maybe your mother or father go to the left, and they have their wing of the house, and maybe they have a little kitchen and a living room. But there's no back door, there's no separate door. There is never an apartment feel to a suburban single-family house. So that, right, on the outside, they all go in the same way. And what you're saying is, when you're adding an in-law, now you're adding more parking. So for every house that you have right now in the city of Lowell, we're really having a hard time getting single-family homes to have parking. I mean, Anne Marie up in Centerville, I mean, they're fighting over spots on the street. They're trying to get signs that says resident parking. I mean, I try to go to visit my neighbors over down off of Fulton Street. You can't park. So what you're also saying is, so down there, if they're going to do an in-law, they can't, because they're not going to have the parking. So again, you go back to the Highlands neighborhood, the big houses, lots of parking. So I really think we have to rethink, do you really want to, at this time, open up the can of worms for an in-law accessory apartment with the challenges that we have now? And knowing that when we go into it, it'll be very difficult to monitor that they stay in-law apartments. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Could I just follow up on Deb's point? we do say in item A, under the provisions, that the appearance of the single-family home must be maintained. So again, just picking up on one point Deb made about having a separate entrance and egress, we're not going to allow that. Council Belanger.
Correct. I agree, Mr. Chairman. Now, Eric, could you confirm for Ms. Forgione that, now, this is, an in-law is going to require one additional off-street parking spot. Is that what I gather here?
That's correct.
So they can't apply for, if it's street where the home relies on on-street parking, they will not be able to add an in-law if it's going to be burdensome to the street, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so that spot will need it to be in their own driveway.
That's correct.
Okay, that's much more comforting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So just want to just mention one thing in response to the public comment, which is, right now, the response that we give to folks who come in and request in-law apartments is kind of exactly what she said they did in Drake, which is you are allowed, because of the, what's the car dealer? The Ernie Bach.
Ernie Bach.
Yes, Ernie Bach had a very famous case where he put in 6 kitchens in his house, and his neighbors claimed that it was a multifamily. You're allowed to have as many kitchens as you want in a house. So our answer to folks who were looking for in-law apartment now is, you can put a separate kitchen, you can put a separate space, but it can't be set up as a separate apartment. It has to have it has to be walkable from one to another without going through an exterior door or a locked door. And that's the answer we give folks. That's often not what folks are looking for. They are looking for something different. So this is just a kind of a response to a request to deal with some situations. They don't want to be in the same physical space. They want to have their own private space, and that it's just a kind of a response to that. But right now, they can do exactly what she was suggesting. They can build a second kitchen and a second bedroom as an addition on a house if they wanted to.
Okay, thank you. John? Oh, I'm sorry, Council Mercia, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Eric Slagle. When I lived on Royal Street, it was a 2-family. But if you looked at the house, you'd swear to God it was a single-family home. But it was a 2-family. We had one door to go in, one door in the back door. That was it, but it was 2-family. Not converted, that's the way it was, a 2-family. So after the lady lived there 17 years and went into a nursing home, I decided to take the upstairs and make it all bedrooms. And I called the city, and the city says, well, we can't give you a discount on anything because you got a kitchen up here on the 2nd floor. You have to take that kitchen out. So tell me about what happened here then. So we left the kitchen there, but I still had bedrooms around it, and I never did get a discount as a single family. So tell me what happened here. How did I get screwed all these many years ago?
Right. Well, again, the traditional method for determining whether or not something was a multifamily was how many kitchens do you have?
Yeah.
Until Mr. Bach successfully defended
Mr. Bach
himself.
should have done this years ago. Thank you.
There are other indications of a separate unit, i.e. Exterior type locking doors that open onto a common space, so that if someone can lock you out and they've got a kitchen, that's usually considered a separate unit. But if there's not a lockable door in between those spaces, it's not considered a separate
Well, that would have been fine. I would have just taken the door off rather than taking the kitchen out, which I never did, and I wasn't looking for rent for my children. I just wanted bedrooms upstairs to give them more room. But anyway, be that as it may. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Mercia. John?
Thank you. John Hamblett, 495 Varnum Avenue. And first of all, a big congratulations to Eric and his team. This is an enormous amount of work. We just got it last week, and I'm glad we're starting with ADUs. We have some experience with that. There are about 80 to 90 changes in this document. If you include the table of use changes, about 300. So I wasn't really anticipating we'd finish that tonight. ADUs came up about 10 years ago, September 2006, and so we had some information from the decisions that were made then. The need came out of really high-cost housing in Seattle, and they needed to generate more affordable housing. And so that is the primary driver behind ADUs. The challenge with ADUs is they increase density, so more people will be living in the same house, but the property value doesn't change. And therefore, you've got the same tax base providing more services. And where you really start to feel that, of course, is in your education expenses, which is a big part of the property tax. So there are challenges in that financially, ADUs don't make a lot of sense. In a city where I think it's about 14% of our homes are already affordable, one has to say, are we in the same situation as Seattle? So that's a big question. Absolutely, Eric has pointed out what we consider to be the number one problem, and that's the enforceability of additional dwelling units. Woburn looked at this, and John Castro of the Planning Board estimated that the enforcement department would have to be increased tenfold to enforce ADUs. And that's a concern. It's a concern as a taxpayer, and it's a concern as someone who works with the neighborhood. In an email or in a letter to Mayor Bill Martin from James Erickson, who was the fellow working on ADUs back in September 2006, he identified 4 critical changes to the ADU amendments we were looking at back then. 3 of them have been fully addressed in Eric and Eric's team's proposal. The first is that the focus of the original ordinance was on making money, income producing. And this has completely reversed that, and this is focused on providing space for a family. It needed to better define the policing of accessory dwelling units, and that's, I think, the question that has come up here. How do we police them? Nobody's ever gotten their hands around that. And we needed some assurances as to the size of the accessory dwelling units. However, James did make a recommendation that I thought I might add into the conversation, and that is that assurances should be provided to ensure the properties with such ADUs do not turn into 2-family properties. Assurances can be in the form of required property deed language to ensure a family member of the primary owner of the property resides in the ADU. It says accessory dwelling unit, I'm abbreviating it. So those are our concerns. Does it erode, not erode our tax base, but increase our expenses against a stable tax base? Do we really need affordable housing? It does increase density. What happens when a family leaves? How do we enforce that? And there didn't seem to be, and I know this is a draft, there didn't seem to be a limit on the number of accessory dwelling units you could have in a home. So presumably you can have more than one. That might be a good limit if you ever decided to go ahead with additional dwelling units. Many comments on other items, but that's ADU.
Thank you, John. Councilor Belanger?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Slagle, Mr. Hamlin raises a good point. Now, let's just say in a suburban single family where it isn't allowed use automatically, you still would have to come in and pull a building permit, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now, does it go back? Now, once the work is complete, it's inspected, it's signed off, now what happens, does the tax assessor come out? Is the house reassessed? Does the value go up and the taxes go up? How does that work?
Well, I think the assessor would likely be the person to make that determination, but every time there's a building permit pulled in the city, that permit is provided to the assessor's office. So anytime anybody does any work on any piece of property in the city, the assessor's office gets a copy of that piece of work. My belief would be that adding a separate unit, even though it would be defined as an accessory dwelling unit, the assessor's office assesses what is there, and so they would assess it as a 2-family for the time that the accessory dwelling unit was there. That would be my belief as to how they would do it, because there would be a separate unit in the structure. And then once that in-law was no longer there and they were required to revert it to a single family,
Right.
That would also require a building permit that would go to the assessor's office, and my anticipation would be they would alter their assessment at that time, as they do for any multifamily that gets reduced in number of units.
Okay, I understand that now. I believe it should be reassessed, and the homeowner would risk saying, the inspector saying, this is a significant improvement on the home, your value to us just went up, and therefore your taxes went up. But I don't think it should be at the same rate as a two-family home where they're able to rent another unit at a market rate to a stranger and whatnot. This is what's going to be, if it is allowed, a single immediate family at a much more discounted rate, I imagine.
There's no rental income.
Yeah,
No.
that's
okay.
not the
Okay, no.
assessors just assess what's there. They're not gonna.
Okay.
They can't, if you have a two-family that includes a 500 square foot studio apartment, or a two-family that has a 3-bedroom as the second unit, they'll assess it on size, but you don't get a discount because you get less rent.
Okay. Okay, that was concerning how the value of the home would go up. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, just to give you an example, I went for like a 3-foot extension of my deck, and I had to file for permits, go in front of the ZBA, and assessors came out. So, something as small as that, all the work that was put in, I would imagine if something like this is put in place, you'd have that type of inspection and then some. So, thank you.
Deb, do you want to come back to the?
Boy, these meetings are usually better in a big round table because it really is dialogue. So the slippery slope. Every time he talks about the in-law, it's going to be considered multifamily and two-family. It's a very slippery slope when you're doing these in-laws. So now we're talking about, does it add increase to the tax base? And it's like, okay, it probably is. So it's going to be taxed as a two-family, and then a year later, after they move out, so now I'm going to be at a meeting where someone's going to come and ask for some kind of variance because it's a hardship now, because now that the family member's gone, I've got this kitchen, I've got this tax base. It starts to be a really slippery slope. So.
Council Belanger?
No, that's a good point, Mr. Chairman, through you to Deb Forgione now. A homeowner cannot use a hardship financial. In other words, a homeowner cannot own a single family and say, I lost my job, I need to convert to a two-family in order to pay my bills. That's a hardship is topography of the land or soil conditions. They cannot use a financial hardship as an argument. I mean, it makes a lot of sense there, but they are unable to use that as an argument to the ZBA.
If somebody, because their parents passed on and they're short of money and they want to rent out a room now to someone, they can do that.
City Manager Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is no such thing as a use variance in the city of Lowell. You just can't get a use variance. You can get one for the topography of the land, but not for the use. So once the people die, and it's no longer defined, it's no longer being used that way, they can't get a variance to use it as a two-family.
All right, so now the parent dies and the good friend lives in the unit that their parent did. How do you enforce that? How do you really even know?
Because they have to come back for a certificate of occupancy every 3 years and prove that that person is,
In a perfect world.
well, we,
And
I'd like
again,
to
in a
think we
perfect
have
world, I think what Council.
as perfect as we
I think
can.
what Council
expect it.
Belanger suggested that it be done more than every 3 years. So maybe they get a certificate of occupancy for 3 years, which is reviewable annually. So they go in every year,
Right.
just to make sure that the mother or the father is still there, whoever is in the unit.
But if they're going to increase the taxes on it because it's going to be like a multifamily, and then their person moves out and they said, well, we're not using it anymore, are they going to be still taxed that high?
It would have to convert back. That unit would have to be taken out.
Okay,
There's no
what if-
ADU any longer. It would have to be removed. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there are remedies that aren't included in here that I did want to kind of throw out to the subcommittee as possibilities. There was we did contemplate, is it possible for us to require a bond such that a bond for the removal of this unit held by the city, so that you have to pay the bond fee. That's, again, another hurdle where someone who legitimately needs this for a family member might be willing to do that, whereas somebody who's just trying to make a quick buck, having to pay for a bond to have this stuff removed might not be willing to do that. Also, as was mentioned by Mr. Hamblett, putting in a deed restriction so that if there's a transfer, as Councilor Elliott had mentioned, even before their lender gets involved, their title company would know, hey, this is only an accessory dwelling unit, and if you don't have an in-law who or a family member who meets this list living there, you have to convert it back, and that's another kind of remedy that would allow us. I mean, I'm all for making this as enforceable as possible, because I understand that's the rub here, is making it enforceable.
And a philosophical thinking, okay, so all the big houses and a lot of the parking, maybe like Pawtucketville or the Highlands. So what you're saying is that the people have wanted to take in their relatives for hardships. So the areas that don't have the extra parking will never be able to do that. So there is going to be an imbalance of people that actually are able to do that. And that's also something they have to consider, because it really does shut out a lot of the city that you're saying that probably will need that. So thank you.
Thank you. John? Again, the ADUs, we're still in the ADUs.
To go back to Eric's point about a revaluation of the home, if you added an ADU, I'm not clear what the overall impact of that is. If you've got two people living in a house and you add an ADU and two more people come in, you've doubled the use and the services are going to be required, but the value of the property isn't going to double. In the 10-year plan that came out 10 years ago, there was a table and it talked about different living situations, apartments or single-family homes or multifamily homes, and the cost of providing services and whether or not those contributed to the city's economy or whether it detracted from the city's economy. I'd love to see some hard numbers about what the overall impact would be if a given percentage, and Eric indicates that there have been quite a few requests. We know there have, because it's been going on for 10 years. But if 10% or 15% of the single-family homes added ADUs and their property taxes went up 10%, I know that the math exists that we could calculate that. I would think that would be important, because you could find yourself with a fairly substantial deficit fairly quickly.
Thank you. Any other comments on the ADUs at this point, Mr. Slagle?
I just want to make one final comment, which is we live in a situation where there are going to be there are people who try to skirt the law. And there are people who try to install separate units into their houses without bothering to pull building permits, without going through the proper channels, and we do everything we can if we find those situations to remedy them. This is just a way to give the people who try to do the right thing a way to get there without, and then on the flip side, we can come down harder on the people who do the wrong thing, because there's a pathway. So this will at least give a mechanism to get to some sort of way to have a family member live at your house.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilor Elliott.
Thank you. Just briefly, I agree with Mr. Slagle. I think, I mean, the motion was filed for a reason, and it is somewhat of a pattern and a trend as the cost of nursing homes and caring for parents. You do see you do see many cases in many cultures where it's the norm, where mom and the parents live with siblings, and then they do raise families. I mean, I guess it's hard to define. We don't want to create situations where people are in the street, but we have to set a standard and have some enforcement mechanism to ensure that zoning laws are being followed and we're in compliance. So, I personally think it's the parking issue that raises the greatest challenge in those areas that it's very dense, and that these situations are taking place. And quite frankly, I think that's how it has come to the council. So. I think this is a step in the right direction, but it's I think it's a work in progress. We have to sort of monitor it and stay on it and not complain, but when there's a situation that's that's sort of not conducive to the neighborhood or the street, that we, that we stay vigilant, particularly with the inspections, to make sure that people aren't just pulling permits, adding apartments, and making problems in neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Elliott. At this time, I think we have time to do the adult, have some discussion of the adult daycare facility, which is the next item. So the chair would recognize Mr. Slagle.
Sure. So the adult daycare facility is a use that currently doesn't exist. We have been fitting those facilities into other close uses, but because of the increased aging population, that we have seen a couple of these facilities come in over the last few years. We thought it made most sense to attempt to try to get a handle on their impacts on the neighborhoods in which they're being proposed, to create a definition, to create a parking requirement for that, and kind of more importantly, to get them to have to go through a defined, specific board review to look at them instead of just kind of allowing them as a matter of right, which the kind of the older definition did. So as you can see, it's a definition which we kind of looked at carefully to try to capture exactly what we're looking at for adult daycare facilities. It's a parking requirement, and then it's allowed in a lot of different districts, but in each of those districts, it's required to go before the planning board for a special permit. It's not allowed as a matter of right in any district. So that way, there is a public vetting of each and every one of these facilities to make sure that the parking and the traffic and all the kind of ancillary issues that come along with a facility like this are at least addressed at some point, and given a kind of a public forum at some point.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from my colleagues on the adult daycare facility? Councilor Belanger.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Mr. Chairman, through you to Eric Slagle now, have inquiries ramped up on this segment too, Eric, as far as adult daycare facilities?
It's hard to tell because it's not the kind of thing that we get a lot of inquiries about anyway. We did have the one on Central Street in the downtown that went in. Duville put in a facility very recently. And there have been inquiries in various different portions of the city about this type of facility. It's not with regularity. However, having the fact that there were two built recently made us feel like we needed to have a strict definition and make sure that because they do have real impacts on traffic and parking and
Okay, yeah,
and
so it's the two newer facilities are the inspiration for this, okay.
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
It's understandable. It's something I would support too, but obviously we're in its infancy, so, okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Councilor O'Rourke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, there's also been some talk around the city of maybe a new facility going up, not necessarily an adult daycare facility, but maybe more like a treatment home on Merrimack Street that supposedly be multiple floors, multiple apartments. Does this fall into this category?
We'd have to get a narrative from regarding the proposal to make a determination as to whether it would fall specifically within this category or fall closer to a nursing home category. It all depends on whether or not they're residents or whether their adult daycare facility has a lot of drop-off and pickup and generates a whole different kind of traffic pattern than a long-term care facility where the residents are living at the facility.
Manager Murphy?
Yes, and this proposed ordinance doesn't allow for overnight stays, so if it was a residential component, it wouldn't come in under this.
Thank you. Councilor O'Rourke?
But just forward thinking, I mean, we do have projects down the line that, whether it's for treatment or for whatnot, that you would have a situation where you'd have multiple, I guess, apartments or studios that would house those that are undergoing treatment. Does the city have something in place for that now?
Yeah, again, if there's a residential component, it's treated as a nursing home. Once there's some sort of stay, whether it be temporary or long-term, that's a nursing or long or short-term care facility as opposed to an adult daycare facility. Because we think that the impacts on the neighborhoods are going to be different from the nursing home where if somebody's staying for 3 days, that's one trip every 3 days. Whereas if somebody's in an adult daycare, you're having multiple trips every day for all the people that are being brought in. So it's just kind of an ancillary issue.
Councilor Elliott?
So just to follow up on that, and there is a project slated right up the road, and it has a daycare component, a treatment component with, so it's sort of mixed use, services on the bottom floor, and then residential units for, long-term permanent housing, from what I gather. How is that covered? Maybe not so much in this amendment, but in the zoning code.
Right now, as I said, I believe it's treated as a nursing home, just as these adult daycare facilities are treating as nursing care facilities right now.
Okay,
They
this
all
wouldn't
fall
be a
under the
nursing
same.
facility, though. I mean, the project as proposed is transitional permanent housing.
Okay. I haven't seen that come before the boards,
Okay.
so I mean.
No, you haven't. It's coming.
Yeah. So part of that determination will have to be, what's the square footage being devoted to one use? What's the square footage being devoted to another? Are they two separate uses? Because it could be both. It could be just like you have like a commercial use on the ground floor and a residential use above it. That's a multi-use building. This could be treated as a multi-use building with a nursing facility on one floor and residential housing on the upper floors, and then both of those uses would have to be legal in the district in order to be allowed there. And if one of them requires a special permit, they're going to have to come and get a special permit from it.
Okay. So can I just make one follow-up?
Dr.
Because
Elliott.
we've had this in the past where if it's a treatment center with housing, that it's governed under state statute and we can't do anything about it, i.e. Former Berry Road or those type of rehab centers.
Right. So the difference between those is rehab centers for so the ADA comes into play as to whether or not we can prohibit those sort of things. Berry Road, for instance, came in under the kind of the Dover amendments for educational. For an educational use. However, physical rehab, if you sprain your leg and you have to get rehab, that typically doesn't fall under an
No,
educational use.
that's not what I meant. Let me be clear. The Lowell House is looking to expand their property, and we want to know if this provision or this addition will cover something like that.
This addition is not intended to cover anything like that. This
Okay.
addition is purely talking about recreational facility, personal care services, recreational, social facilities, common dining facilities for older or disabled persons. So that's all we're trying to capture in this provision.
So are there provisions in the zoning code as exists that designate certain areas for something like that?
Well, again, the Lowell House
Certain
is
zones.
likely to attempt to come in under the same kind of thing that the Berry Road project came
Okay,
under,
thank you.
which is a Dover
You're
Amendment
welcome.
exemption.
Before we recess, any comments from the public on the adult daycare facility? Okay, thank you. Councilor Belanger.
A quick comment, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Eric, I appreciate you taking a look at this. It's, I think, a much-needed service in the city, and I'd like to be welcoming as we can. But we need to, I think, be cognizant of a few issues here, and that being, drop-off service. Most of these out there, so we'll need an off-street area, whether it's a horseshoe driveway or a safe environment that allows good egress for a drop-off area, and obviously sufficient parking for staff and some residents that will be driving. It's very minimal. So, again, I'd like to be welcoming, but we need to make sure this isn't a burdensome on the neighborhoods with parking, and a safe drop-off is very important to me. So, thank you.
Thank you. At this point, let me thank the administration for the presentation this evening, thank the public for being here, and the chair would entertain a motion to accept the report as a report of progress into recess of the subcommittee meeting, and we will entertain scheduling another subcommittee meeting, and we'll try to be more inclusive to make sure that all the citywide neighborhood groups are certainly notified to be here. So, Councilor Rook?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A motion to recess.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's a vote. Thank you. Thank you all.